Pentagon in cost-cutting mode between Congress slashing $500 million from its budget over 10 years and the drawdowns as Iraq and Afghanistan wind down. Military is being proposed to shrink further. Now, the Army looking to cut its headcount by about 200,000 from a level of more than 1 million people. And with the ISIS threat still looming, many are worried this is a case of very bad timing. That includes some top military brass. Time saying some Pentagon leaders are calling for more boots on the ground in Iraq and Syria. The report also says military officials, they've been meeting with the president and telling him more needs to be done to stop ISIS. Well, let's bring in Mike Lyons, who's a military analyst and retired captain in the U.S. Army who served in Iraq. And before we get to where the cuts can be, how they'll hurt, how they won't, the growing consensus is there is a consensus we need to do something about ISIS, and it can't just be airstrikes. As many as I understand this, Mike, can you clarify how it would work? A coalition force, obviously led by the U.S., of as many as specialists to go after 3,000 ISIS. This is much with Libya being a front, right, as much as it's Syria, right?
I mean, no question. You're looking at what's called the northern part of Africa there, as well as these terrorist organizations just find safe havens. Even if once they're eradicated from Iraq and Syria, we're going to have to hunt them down in places like Libya where other failed nation states are. So this mission is going to continue. It's going to be the long war. It's going to go on for a long time. And we've got to devote the resources in order to fight it. Let's have this fight over 8 time zones from now than here on 42nd Street.
Just big picture math. I keep hearing the number ISIS about 30,000 strong, spread out. Is that a fair number?
Yeah, and so military planners would say you need 3 times as many to go on the offensive to destroy that type of organization. Now, this is not a conventional force. Unlike, Ted Cruz was talking about carpet bombing, for example. You really can't carpet bomb. It's not the same as we did in the first Gulf War, where we were able to carpet bomb specific precision military targets. Not the same here. However, you're going to need not only a large contingency of operators to take care of the initial problem, but then this backflow of teachers and lawyers and people to create society that's going to take place. So there's a implied nation building task that's going to happen both in Syria and starting to happen in Iraq.
To move ahead with this, they're basing this a lot of ways after the 9/11 attacks that the authorities there to go do this. But do you guys think this is something that of the president, regardless of Democrat, Republican, should make unilateral? Or do you think this should be something that Congress should weigh in on? Or is this the role of Congress to get involved in something like this? Specifically this, trying to eradicate ISIS.
Well, the president's pushed for this for the last couple of years, and Congress really hasn't bid at it.
They can do it without him.
The White House believes after that the orders after 9/11 give them the leeway to do this in the war on terror. But the White House has been asking for a specific authorization from Congress for the fight against ISIS.
But now it seems like we're talking about an occupying force. It seems like we're talking about an infrastructure. We're talking about 3 times the amount of troops. If you don't think that requires congressional approval.
Well, they don't think it does. I'm with you, which is where's the line? Because they weren't responsible for the attacks in 9/11. I'm not saying they're horrible human beings that the world would be better without. I'm just saying, where's the line, though, Mike, between I have the authority, I'm going in, to, hey, Congress, weigh in here, get some stick in the game?
I think based on the Constitution, I'm not an attorney, but based on the Constitution and the War Powers Act, presidents now can go to war, they just can't stay at war. They do require Congress to continue to fund them. There was a requirement for president to report back on what's going on. But I think this Congress...
Would you call this war, though?
Look, yeah, I think there's a bright light between peace and war. So, what was it Thomas Jefferson said? Peace is really the only time that in between when people are fighting that you're reloading anyway. So, yeah, there's a bright line here when it comes to what's going on here. We're going to send people into harm's way to do this kind of work as war.
So it would seem counterintuitive to say, okay, listen, this force, this ISIS presence is not going away. This is of national security given what they've done. This doesn't just stay in the Middle East. Certainly we have evidence of that, but we're going to cut back in the military. I spoke to an expert as it relates to the Navy, and he was trying to make the argument that, the idea of us, not just mothballing, but getting rid of carriers, et cetera, it isn't just projecting force, it's also deterrent. It's a hard argument to make when people are asked to tighten belts and other things, but there is a consequence to this. And speak from the Army side, so if you cut a couple 100,000 troops, what does it mean?
It's about readiness, and really what it means is more casualties. And what I think in terms of what's happened here since really 1980, since the end of the Vietnam War, our country has made it protection of the force a very important element of going to war. We just don't take casualties well, okay? You look at, you go back to Mogadishu, Black Hawk Down, we lost 18 soldiers in that battle. We probably killed 5,000. In the history of warfare, there's never been that kind of ratio. Fast forward to Benghazi, okay? We had 4 people killed in that battle, so to speak. We killed thousands of the other guys. But we just don't take on casualties. And so a lot of the money that goes to the military is about protecting the force. We have tanks and equipment that's designed to protect the force. So when we think by cutting down the people, we think that because the people that we have are going to be protected in better equipment. I think that that's still yet to be proved. What it could eventually lead to is more casualties.
But Mike, one of the things that really bothers me is I don't think there's a comprehension of how difficult this ISIS is. It's not a state. It's not a place where you can invade. It's not throwing an army at it. Raqqa alone, people are being held, they're hostage. And they're being held hostage in front of the ISIS people. Yeah. This isn't like having a normal operation. This requires special ops. It's not. And I think people mistake this, including presidential candidates, that somehow there's a line over there, that's where the bad guys are, and we're the good guys.
And with the remote control, you can kill them, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's not, just to finish, it's not numbers of people in the military, it's a whole different way of fighting, isn't it?
No question. It's asymmetrical warfare, something that, you know, the only way to fight the United States is to do it in this manner. Because if you fight us conventionally, we're going to kill you. It's not going to work.
But on some level, aren't we starting with the presumption that this isn't a popular government? That there aren't millions and millions of people in these nations who support ISIS and believe in what ISIS stands for? And aren't we just setting ourselves up to be the front lead nation as an invading force in what might in fact be a popular regime in some places?
Well, I think that you're right. This is not something that could be in large numbers. It could be just a movement. But the question gets back to how much of this movement is being exported. I mean, look, it only took 21 9/11 hijackers to take down 2 buildings to cause the last 15 years of what we have right now. So we're seeing, you know, a few individuals in Paris, a few individuals here and there. We're now going to the eaches when it comes to combat. And that's, to your point, you don't need an army for that. That's better intelligence, that's better security, and better containment.
I have some questions. The military readiness, the worries about that and that we can't cut the force, we need more money, those are coming from voices that have vested interests in keeping the money and keeping the force level where it is or expanding it. The Pentagon wants its money, the Pentagon wants its staff.
Yeah, there's people and then there's material, okay? And you have this industrial military complex that frankly, Congress uses as a jobs program. There are things that the military is forced to buy that the military doesn't use.
There's a lot of back and forth from the Pentagon into that military industrial complex.
Sure, but when rock hits the road, we talk about preparedness, right? Look at the fact that we sent soldiers to war in Iraq initially. They didn't have the right vehicles. It took them a while to get those MRAPs, the body armor. We had people shipping that.
We're not talking about an Iraq scale. I mean, we had Iraq and Afghanistan at the same time. We're not talking about anything close to that level when it comes to Syria, when it comes to Libya, and we're not the only force.
But Andrew, how do you know? This is my question. If I talked to you in September 10th of 2001, and I said, you know, why don't we cut the military? You don't know. I don't know. He doesn't even know what will happen in this world.
I don't know, but I
so
do know that.
So you can't all of a sudden say, okay, tomorrow I want to add 200,000
we spend more than the next 8 countries in the world on their military put together, and we keep rushing headlong to be the only policeman in the world.
My only point that comes down to it is we are the same guys in this program, and I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think it's a legitimate point, who bitch and moan about how we send these guys back on 4th and 5th tours here because we got nobody to take their spots. No, so we want it both ways.
We're also avoiding and are completely unsuccessful in building true coalitions to fight these problems. Mm-hmm. We're completely unsuccessful. The truth of the matter, the brunt of the terrorism attacks have not been in our borders. They've been in Western Europe's borders or Asia's borders, and we continue to feel like we got to be the defender of the Western world.
But Scott,
take the lead and take the casualties.
To Andrew's point, though,
clearly we are in fact. I don't know whether that's the best strategy.
This is not just about Middle East. China's building its navy. Russia is building up its warfare. I mean, Russia's playing out in Syria with their equipment. We have not invested in the Navy or the Air Force for years. Yeah. We're way behind. We're 70-80% steady, ready for some of this. I mean, we're not prepared for those kinds of conflicts.
10,000 artillery tubes are pointed from the north to the south every day. 4.5 minutes time of flight. Seoul is leveled. is the United States willing to put 100,000 troops into South Korea? If that unthinkable scenario happens, are we willing to do that? It would take years and a D-Day type invasion for us to defend our ally in South Korea. Those are the kind of things that the military planners have got to be concerned about.
And how about Andrew, NATO? Okay, we've talked at length about what happened in Ukraine. What if it expands to some other place that it's not a debatable thing whether they're a member of NATO?
Estonia.
What's our job? Are we going to say, well, they don't really count, really? There's going to be a line. And my only point is for all of us, and I'm critical too. I hate some of the programs that always seem to be on the chopping block when the others are sacrosanct. But nobody's got the luxury to turn around and say, all right, well, get another 300,000 guys. We're not bringing the draft back. So I just think we want it both ways sometimes.
We're also not the only members of NATO. And that's the whole thing. It's an alliance. So all of Europe would be with us as we would go in to defend a NATO ally. Yes, we would have to increase our spending to help
the day
augment
and age where
NATO.
the French or the Brits or us,
but
come
also,
on.
you know, when we're talking about Syria and we're talking about Libya, where's Saudi Arabia in all this? Where's Iran in all this? Shouldn't they be invested in this process too? I'm a little suspect when we're being asked to put up more money for more weapons and more soldiers and more losses, and we're the only ones who are running in to fill the breach here.
Let's get real, though, okay? Saudi Arabia is not going to align with any other. They're not going to fight ISIS the way we are. They're the same religion. They're going to fight Iran. I mean, that's why you're not going to find these folks aligning with one another. There's no such thing in the Middle East. And secondarily, I mean, when you really start talking about it's China and Russia, those are your main competitors, and especially in the investments they've made in military, which we have not done. We can't be at 80% or 70% ready for assets. Yep. I mean, and that's where we are.
Just remember, the Soviet Union ran itself broke with its military spending. That's one of my concerns, is that we're overspending on our military. And yes, we have security issues, but we have other needs that we need a government for and that we need to use our revenue
Russia,
for.
even now, Soviet Union doesn't retire weapons. They just bring them behind the Ural Mountains and don't count them. So if they ever have to go to war, everything comes back on the table. And mass is still a principle of war, and that would still win. And again, it would take us 4 years to ramp up D-Day type invasion to get some of those places
also,
back.
as a percentage of our budget, the military now, as huge as it is in their expenditure, is a fraction of what it's been historically. So I don't know how this all resolves itself, but it was just fascinating to me as we had this conversation. Well, we're going to have a more pronounced role in fighting ISIS. And by the way, we're at the Pentagon figuring out where we're going to cut. And cut real, not cosmetic cuts.
Is it just me that thinks this feels like a post-World War II framing of a discussion? I mean, I'm sorry, but I feel like we've progressed in the last generation where we don't think we have to be the only...
They got me on a break, but Scott, I got a question for you. Can you remember a time in the last 20 years where there is such a level of uncertainty in the world with so many places so unstable? For me, it is.
I don't know. I remember the Secretary of Joint Chief of Staff telling me I had mutually assured destruction implements in Iraq. So I was pretty scared.
Don't get me to argue
I
with
was
that
pretty
one.
scared
We
that
no longer have a strategic deterrence.
And all I know is the military
Stick around.
told
We
me
got
I
an
a
interesting
threat
debate, nothing
coming
to do
out.
about the military, but it's hard enough to get into college, certainly pay for it. But now some schools using screening measures that could make it immeasurably harder. We'll explain in debate after this.